Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the BLANCCO Technology Group plc interim results investor presentation. Throughout this recorded presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab that's just situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Please just simply type in your questions at any time and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company will review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it is appropriate to do so. These will be available via your Investor Meet Company dashboard, and we'll notify you by email when these are ready for your review. Before we begin, I would like to submit the following poll, and if you'd give that your kind attention, I'm sure the company will be most grateful. And I'd now like to hand you over to Matt Jones, CEO, and Adam Maloney, CFO. Good afternoon to you both.
Good afternoon, and thanks everybody for joining us this afternoon. Adam and I are really excited about sharing the first half results and talking a little bit about what we see for the future of BLANCCO. So, Adam, if you go to the second slide, please. We really have kind of six topics we'll touch on today. I'll give a quick overview of the highlights for first half. We'll again give a company overview because many of you may have heard of BLANCCO or seen our presentation before, but I think it's always good to talk about the basics of who we are and what we do. We'll talk about growth drivers that are going on in the industry. Adam will go with detailed financial review. We'll get an update on each one of our markets because there's really three markets we compete in, and then wrap up with summary outlook and then take your questions. So just quick highlights. And again, Adam will go through a lot more details. We had a very good first half of the year. We traded at 20% up on constant currency from a revenue, and that revenue growth really filtered down into operating profits, into EBIT, into cash flow, and we saw growth across all three geographies that we sell into in all three markets. In the enterprise space, channels continue to grow for us. Those are an important part of our drivers for enterprise, with channel revenue up 33%. And I think as we talk about some of the drivers, you'll see the sustainability and governance continue really to drive growth. And again, Adam will go through each one of these numbers in a lot more detail. Again, just to take a step back of who we are, think of BLANCCO as a pure software company. And part of software companies, the important thing to do is really drive innovation. And so we have development centers in three different places around the world, in Finland, in Ireland, and India. We have over 38 granted or filed patents, and we're really driving our business forward as innovative software company. That one of the other things we're seeing that's very interesting for us that we'll talk in a little bit is the sustainability angle that our product can bring to customers is beginning to really resonate with our customers. And as we go through some of the different markets we're in, we're going to talk about our product innovations, things we're doing in enterprise, things we're doing in mobile, and things we're doing in the ITAD market to drive growth longer term. We're also internally looking at ourselves to make sure that we're good stewards. And as Adam talks a little bit about some of the things we're doing in ESG, we want to make sure that we do the right things as well too. And so we have an MSCI rating at A, and also have the Green Economy mark, and we're going to continue to push ourselves just like we help our customers to be good stewards as we think about sustainability. You've probably, if you've seen our presentation, seen this before as well too. This is a chart that Gartner does every year. It talks about, well, in this case, probably 40 different technologies and where they are in the enterprise buying cycle. And where they have data sanitization, I think is about right, which is we're just becoming into mainstream adoption, or what Gartner calls the slope of enlightenment. And so what we see here is that we've been through years and years of educating the market and helping understand the drivers of the market. And now, as we talk to our different customers, they see data sanitization as really a key thing they need to consider as they think about security and compliance and sustainability. As I talked about, there's three different markets that we sell into: the enterprise, the mobile, and the ITAD. All of them have different needs, but most of the technology we develop in our three development centers goes across at least two or all three markets. So the enterprise is our biggest market. It tends to be where we use channels, and so we talk about this channel growth. Channels are the main way we get to enterprises. It tends to be that this is a SaaS-based model for us, so they buy us the way typical software gets built, and we really think there's great opportunity for an enterprise, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. In the mobile market, it's important to understand that our typical customer is the big mobile processor. So they're when you go and turn your hand phone into a Vodafone, Vodafone will turn around and give that phone to these big mobile processors, people like Hyla or Shurion, who diagnose, who wipe, and then refurbish and resell the phone. So those are our major customers. This is our most competitive market in terms of the dynamics we have, and primarily they pay on a volume base. In the ITAD market, this is where we really began the company 20 years ago. And ITAD are big companies like Ingram Micro or Tessem. And these are companies that work with enterprises. When enterprises want to get rid of their equipment at the end of life, they give that business to the ITAD, and the ITAD will take that equipment back, wipe it, recycle it, resell it. And so it stays in the circular economy. We have a very big market share in the ITAD market. We have about 70% market share, and it's a great market for us as we think about continuing to grow our business long term. So again, when we come back to these markets, it's important to understand that all three markets are important to us. And when Adam goes through the details, you'll see that each one drives significant revenue from us. So let's go to some growth drivers and what's important to us as we think about it. The first and probably most obvious one is data privacy and governance. And so you see, again, this is from the Gartner report that came out recently, that by the end of 2023, 80% of all size companies will be under some kind of privacy-focused data protection regulation. And so people are thinking about, how do I think about protecting my data? How do I meet all the privacy laws? And this is, we talk to our customers, probably the number one driver why they use data erasure is to make sure they can meet the compliance and privacy laws that are getting implemented across the world. So there's not a country in the world that doesn't have some form of privacy very similar to GDPR in Europe. And the second driver is just the pure amount of data that's being produced. So if you look at the graph down on the right-hand side, you see that data is growing at 61% a year. So it's really growing exponentially. And so no longer is it just okay for enterprise just to keep all their data. It's just too much data. So they're really moving through what they call a data life cycle. So it starts with creation and it ends really with manage your data through data erasure, data destruction. And so we're part of this data life cycle. And as data grows and grows, they understand that part of the reason you need to be a good steward of your data and to make it accessible is you need to erase it. You need to protect it in a way so you don't give hackers the opportunity to get in and get into old data. So more and more using our services to help from a security perspective to make sure they keep the data they need and erase the data that's no longer useful for them. Adam, I'll pass over to you.
Thanks a lot, Matt. So yes, as Matt mentioned, data privacy governance is incredibly important for our customers. But there's two ways really that they can manage that problem. One is that they can use data erasure software such as ours to make sure that data is completely irrecoverable from any device, or they can destroy it. And what we see in the vast majority of cases is that IT equipment is shredded into tiny fragments and is sent to landfill, often not in the same country that the device was disposed of in. But clearly, when we start looking at sustainability, there's only one of these methods that is very sustainable. That's obviously the use of data erasure, which enables you to recycle, repurpose, resell that device without any risk of the data being compromised. And e-waste is becoming a bigger and bigger problem. So the UN estimated last year that in 2021, 57 million tons of e-waste were generated worldwide. And that figure is growing very quickly. It's expected to get to 74 million tons by 2030. Recycling is moving at different paces in different regions. So in Europe, it's expected that 42% of e-waste is formally recycled, but in Asia that drops to 12%, and in America less than 10%. And when you look at the huge amount of materials that are required to manufacture just one device, I mean, just here on the fourth bullet, we can see that to make one laptop and one monitor, you need 500 pounds of fossil fuel, 50 pounds of chemicals, and 1.5 tons of water just to make one laptop and one monitor. So it's very resource consumptive. So really, if you can recycle those materials, it could be a huge carbon saving for hardware manufacturers. On the next slide, we look at this. Much of this slide was taken from one of our customers, Tessem, who are an ITAD customer and specialize in the repurposing and reselling of IT equipment. And what they've found in their data is that the average life of a computer device is reducing. It was over 4 years, a device would go from being brand new to being disposed of in 2017, and now that's dropped to less than 3 years. So the amount of equipment we have is lasting less than it used to. We also note that they talk about the huge amount of harmful chemicals that are stored within computer equipment. So 50 tons of mercury originating from e-waste are dumped each year into landfill. And most of that is coming from computer equipment, because computer equipment, being laptops, smartphones, tablets, make up around about 50% of all e-waste, with the rest being things like fridges and washing machines or whatever it might be. So the computer equipment element of e-waste is incredibly significant. One of the other things that we are doing on top of this environmental impacts is starting to look at the societal impacts as well. Because clearly it's a nonsense when there's huge sections of society around the world who can't get access to computer equipment, but yet a lot of it is being thrown into landfill. So we've worked with a number of organizations to work on initiatives to get more equipment out to underprivileged sections of society who can use that equipment. And that started really with the Laptop for Kids project, which we worked on with another AIM-listed company, WANDisco. They initiated the project, and it was around collecting computer equipment in the Sheffield area that was then redistributed to underprivileged children in that region, so that they could study from home when we were in the midst of the pandemic. And through the pandemic, between us, we got 14,000 items of computer equipment out to children in the region. So incredibly beneficial for those children that needed that when all of their learning was being done from home. And that's led to other initiatives. So just to give you a flavour of the things that we're doing, we're working with the Turing Trust to enable computer equipment to be redistributed to African schools. We're working with the Dairy Foundation in Vietnam, who are sourcing computer equipment for underprivileged children in that region. And we're also supporting the Ethan Indigenous Project, which is aiming to supply 80,000 laptops to Indigenous children in Australia. So all of these things are charitable initiatives, which we're very happy to support and really highlight that it doesn't make any sense for computer equipment to be going into landfill. Moving on now to the numbers. As Matt said, we had a very strong period. In the 6 months to December 21, we grew by 13%, which on the face of it looks to be modest growth, but actually when you adjust for currency movements, the growth was 20%. And when we couple that with the first 6 months of the 21 calendar year, when we saw currency adjusted growth of 25%, that's 12 months of 20% plus growth that we've seen. So really strong growth on the top line. And then we look at gross margin. We were able to make some internal innovations during the period, which enabled us to lose the cost of third-party licenses in the business. And so that saw our cost of goods sold drop down, and our gross margins increased from 93% to 97%. A lot of that has flowed down to the bottom line. So you can see operating profit, adjusted operating profit, up by 36% to £4 million. Adjusted EBITDA up 21% to £6.4 million. And we're particularly pleased with the operating margin and the EBITDA margin, which are 20% and 33% respectively. As we look ahead, it's normal in the second half of the year, the margins tighten a little bit. As you saw it last year, we had 17% operating margin in the first half of the year, then 15% for the full year. So the second half of the year was around about a 13% operating margin. That's because we do a lot of our recruitment in our sort of budget cycles in the first half of the year, and we also award pay increases effective October. So you get a full 6 month impact of that coming through in the second half of the year. And what will exaggerate things a little bit more this year is that we are expecting travel to start coming back. We're beginning to see it happen now. We've really done no travel for the last 2 years, but that's starting to come back. And as a global business, there is a bit of travel in the business, but we don't expect it to get back to pre-pandemic levels anytime soon. So we'll see operating margins come back a little bit in the second half of the year, but we still think that they'll be very strong and pushing up towards the 20% type mark. Moving on to the balance sheet. The balance sheet is pretty straightforward. Cash is really the highlight number that people tend to look at. And in this instance, we can see that cash has gone from 10.1 million to 10.2 million, which doesn't look particularly impressive. But in December, we did a $1.5 million share buyback for shares back into our employee benefit trust to satisfy options for vesting options. And that means that when options reach vesting, we don't need to issue new shares that are going to dilute our current shareholders down anymore. So we thought that was a good use of the cash. But other than that, you can see there's not a lot of movement on the other balance sheet lines. The only one where there's a fair amount of movement is you can see on debtors have increased to £7.8 million. And that's really because of a very strong trading period as we pushed up towards the end of the 21 calendar year. I'll now look at the three markets that Matt referred to earlier and just how they've performed. Enterprise, we've often talked about enterprise. We felt about it being our fastest growing part of business. We've always said that we felt this should grow at 15 to 20% a year. Matt and I are now 3.5 years into our tenure with BLANCCO, and the first 3 years it grew at 18% a year. This period with currency adjustments, it grew at 17% a year. So it's trading in line with what we would expect. As Matt mentioned earlier, channel is going to be increasingly important. So channel revenues increased 33%. So they now represent 57% of our enterprise revenue. So becoming more and more important, and we think that percentage will continue to increase. ITAD was the standout performer in this period. It grew by 40% on the currency adjusted basis, and there's a number of things behind this. Firstly, the comparison period when we're looking at the really July to December 2020 was a very different time, and ITADs struggled a little bit in that period because they're very much reliant on being able to access customer premises, take end-of-life equipment away, and then sort of sanitize that on behalf of their customers. If you're not able to access the customer premises, you're not going to be able to do that so quickly. So we saw ITAD go backwards a little bit in the first half of last year. But now as economies are starting to reopen, we're beginning to see a little bit of a boom period as companies are adjusting to a more flexible workplace where employees probably don't have a designated desk anymore. There's more hot desking. There's not a PC and a monitor on each desk that people will come in with their laptop and take it home with them at the end of the day. And so there's a lot of old equipment that needs clearing out of these offices. We're beginning to see that pent-up demand being released, particularly in the US. So in this period in the US, we saw 130% growth in ITAD. When you looked at Europe, that went to about 30%, and in Asia, it was flat. And so I think that was really an indicator of how economies are opening back up, with the US having been open for most of that period, Europe slowly reopening, and Asia not having quite got there yet. So we think there's probably still maybe another 12 months, maybe 18 months of this sort of boom period in ITAD to run before it settles at what we think will be a 10 to 15% organic growth rate. And then in mobile grew at a constant currency rate of 7%. Mobile has been the one area where we've seen a little bit of challenge from the chip shortage and supply chains that have been ongoing around the world. We do our business through phones that are traded in when people buy a new handset. And if people aren't buying as many new handsets because there aren't as many in the market, then we won't see as many coming through being traded. And we definitely saw that. So we've seen most of our bigger customers in this area to process maybe 10 to 20% fewer phones than they did at the same period last year. But we are beginning to see that open up, and we expect mobile to do a lot better as we go through the second half of the year. And then just touching on the geographies, Asia and Europe both grew in the mid 20%. We think the Western economies are definitely coming out of the pandemic a little bit quicker, and we're seeing that coming through in numbers. Asia growth's only been 9%, but Asia is very dominated by mobile. So around about half the revenue in Asia comes from mobile. And if mobile isn't doing well, then Asia won't be doing so well either. So as we go forward, we expect all of these regions to grow at similar rates as they have done over the last three or so years. So that's largely now on the numbers. I'll obviously take any questions at the end, but for now, I'll pass back to Matt.
All right, thanks, Adam. So let's go through each one of these markets we talk about and give you a little flavor for the market and then also kind of the innovation we're doing from a product perspective. So one of the important parts of the enterprise market, a sub-market, is the government opportunity, the public sector. In fact, next week we'll be putting out a study that where we went to, I think, 7 different countries and talked to the government customers about kind of the trade-offs they want to make between making sure that they retain a kind of a robust and resilient security posture. They want to make sure the data they have is erased, and compare that to minimizing the environmental impact they have by physical destruction. Because again, as Adam mentioned, our biggest competitor in these markets is not another software company, but it's people shredding their equipment or physical destruction. And so again, we're putting out a study on this because we think it's a really important market. Right now, the government market makes about 20% of our enterprise business, but we really think it's very untapped. And so on the right-hand side, you see a little case study. So in the Singapore government, in Q4 of last year, we won a tender with the Singapore government. And the use case is they were going to replace 100,000 laptops over the next 2 or 3 years. And they had 3 criteria. One, that they could reuse or recycle this equipment. They could give it to some of the things that Adam mentioned that we're doing to people who need laptops because they're still good. But again, you absolutely had to meet the criteria for wiping these drives to a standard. In this case, it was NIST standard, which is a well-known erasure standard. And finally, they wanted to make sure that everything was done on site. They wanted to make sure that nothing left the Singapore government offices until they're totally erased. And of course, we have an erasure as a service that can be done remotely and on site. So this is, I think, a good example of what governments are struggling with, making sure that you can erase the data, but making sure they can be good corporate citizens as well, too. And now we're working with the Singapore government to expand some of the opportunities we have beyond desktop and laptop, for example, into their data centers. And again, Adam mentioned kind of the interesting opportunity we have, and what we will be introducing really in June of this year is a sustainability dashboard. And what it is taking the data we already provide our customers and allowing them to see how we can help them in their journey if they use BLANCCO's erasure, both to reduce their e-waste and reduce their carbon footprint. And so we've just introduced a beta of this version of this product this month. We're working with our big customers and what data they want to see, how they want to see it, because we really think this would be a brand new driver for erasure in the business. Right now, we may have a small part of their business do one piece of erasure. And I think by showing them that by using software erasure, they can really improve their overall footprint from a sustainability perspective. It's going to allow us to expand our opportunities within the enterprise market. So we're really excited about this product that can help our customers as they think about sustainability. If we go to the mobile side and talk about innovation, I think I mentioned earlier, and Adam mentioned, the people who are our main customers are these big mobile processors, and they might take in 100,000 phones a month and refurbish, recycle, resell them. But there's a whole middle market that we've never really called on. We have nice market share, probably 25–30% market share in this higher end market. But our salespeople came back and said there's a couple hundred of these middle tier processors that process a lot less phones, maybe 10,000 a month, that we really didn't have a product for. So what we did is we repackaged our product into a very simple, easy to use, easy to implement, easy to price solution called BLANCCO Accelerate, that we can take, let our salespeople take this mid-market and really open up a new opportunity for us. It's also interesting, we're doing a subscription-based pricing on this, so that the team would know and customers know exactly what's going to cost them as they do that. So again, we're excited about it. We've introduced this. We've already won a couple customers, and it's opening up a new opportunity. So it's really a repackaging of our technology into allowing us to go into a new market. And talk about ITAD a little bit. One of the new things we've done is ITADs came back to us probably about 12 months ago and said, they process thousands and thousands of pieces of equipment. And one of the things they started getting more and more over the last 6 to 12 months are Chromebooks. And so they came back to us and said, listen, we already process all the Apple, PCs and laptops, all the Microsoft laptops. Can you provide a solution that does Chromebooks as well, too? And so again, it's a repackaging of our technology. It's a different OS system, so there was some development needed. And now we've just implemented this at the beginning of the year, where now our ITADs can take any Chromebook, can make sure they get data eraser, they get all the things that go along with data erasure, including our management reports, so that again, it's improving our capabilities with our customer and open up a new market for us that allows us to drive more revenue. So we're really excited in all 3 of these cases. We're taking our development teams that I think are world-class and doing innovation to help to drive both current growth and future growth for BLANCCO. So let me go to a little summary here, and then we'll open up for questions and answers. I see we already have a couple questions come through. I think what you've seen is both a further and maybe even a better word, acceleration of revenue, profit, and cash flow over the last 3.5 years, especially over the last 12 or 18 months as we've come out of the pandemic, a real acceleration of both top line and then bottom line. we're obviously now into the first 2 months of our second half of the year, and I think we're seeing very good sales, and pipeline is continuing to grow. So we're very optimistic about the second half of the year. Adam mentioned this pent-up demand for the ITAD customers. It's exciting because you'll see some short-term growth, but we also think we've upgraded this market to think it's for us in the long term, next 3 or 4 years, a really great growth market for us, especially given our market share. Enterprise will continue to be the strongest market for us long term, and the focus on the channels is really important to us to drive that growth. We really feel like we have confidence in these drivers we talked about. Sustainability, security, governance are all important drivers for our growth. And the product innovation I mentioned over the last couple of minutes is another thing I think that allows us both to, one, stay ahead of the competition, because I think we're the best in the market in what we produce, and drive new growth for us long term. So I think we'll stop there. We'll hand it back over to our moderator, and we'll take some questions.
Matt, Adam, thank you very much for your presentation this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, please do continue to submit your questions using the Q&A tab that's situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. But just while the team take a few moments to review those questions submitted already, I would like to remind you that a recording of this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, will be able to be accessed by your investor dashboard. Matt, Adam, if I could ask you just to have a look at that Q&A tab, you'll see we received a couple of questions from Simon and Michael. If I could please just hand back to you to read out those questions and give responses where it's appropriate to do so, and I'll pick up from you at the end. Thank you.
Sure.
Great.
Thank you. Matt, why don't I read out the questions? And the first one I think is for you. Everybody who's listening in, we've got only 2 questions so far. So if you've got any more that you'd like to fire in, please send them in while we're answering these first 2. So Matt, the first question is that compliance is a great driver for enterprise sales. Who are we competing with typically?
Yeah, so really good question. It is a great driver for us, and we're seeing, as we said, this expansion of compliance and privacy around the world. From a software perspective, there aren't other major players, and there's a bunch of small ones that will compete against, geographically, but they all would be, a tenth our size. Again, I think our biggest competition is physical destruction. Clearly, 80%, I think, as Adam mentioned, of the data erasure is done by physical destruction, and to me, that's just an old school way of doing this. We've proven over and over again that software data erasure not only is as good as physical destruction from a privacy or from a security perspective, but it also helps in compliance, because we can really give you a full view of tracking what's been erased. It's better than physical destruction, and certainly there's a sustainability portion of this as well too. So really, our biggest competitor, I hope I answered your question, Simon, is physical destruction, and we think that trend is going to go down over time. It only makes sense, and that's really great for us.
Thanks, Matt. I'll take the second question. I'll read it out myself. So it's where do we see the growth coming from geographically, and what's driving the channel growth? So I think we think geographically, typically in the past, it's been pretty well spread across all 3 regions. They've all been growing at good rates. We tend to see it be a little bit different in each of the 3 geographies, though, in terms of the mix. So with regards to Asia, for example, as I mentioned earlier, we see a lot of mobile activity in Asia. If you can think that the handsets that are traded in the West are often being resold in the Asian markets, where they're probably more open to taking a second-hand phone. So we see good growth in Asia in mobile. We expect that to continue. I would say in enterprise, we think probably North America is going to be the strongest market. It's the market with the biggest businesses in there, with the most data, and are starting to feel the pressure of data governance and data security penalties coming through. So we think enterprise will grow quite strongly, particularly in North America. And I think in Europe, we'll probably tend to see pretty even spread across the 3 markets in Europe. It tends to be a little bit of each. So we'll see a bit of a mix across the board. In terms of the channel growth, I mean, that's certainly something we've been talking about for the last couple of years. So BLANCCO have always had a really nice channel network. We've got around about 50 channel partners that have generated the £4 million that we've generated in the first half of the year through channel. There's no dependency on any one of them, so none of them are more than 10% of the whole. What we are going to start seeing, I think, more over the next couple of years is some bigger, well-known partners. So in the past, it's been companies like an Ingram Micro or a Carasoft or a Software One, somebody like that. But in the last couple of years, we've added the likes of Deloitte and Accenture and Infosys and ServiceNow, AWS, those kind of guys, and they're at the very early stages of generating revenue. So I think the further growth in channel will come, a lot of it from that, and also from just internal initiatives where we are pushing sales guys to push more and more through the channel. We think if we send business to the channel partners, they're much more likely to send some back to us as well. So it's very much a two-way process. So yeah, we think over the coming years we'll see channel being made up, probably getting up to around 70% of being coming from channel in the enterprise market. So one more question's come in. So it says, how much drop through in revenue do we expect to see above the 20 million turnover line in profit? So Andy, I'll try and see if I've quite understood the question correctly. So basically, if the question is, if we generate more than £20 million in revenue, how much of that drops through to the bottom line? The answer is a lot of it. So the operational gearing in the business is very strong. Cost base is primarily people, around 70-75%. If we saw a couple of bigger deals that came through and really pushed the top line growth much faster, a lot of that would drop through, as we've seen in this year, where we've had good revenue generation first half of the year and operating margins got up to 20%. When Matt and I joined in 2018, operating margins were 12%. So a lot of the growth that we've managed to push through over the last couple of years has come through in profit. As I said, I think in the second half of the year we'll see our cost base grow a bit because we have got more employees on board. We have done pay rises. Travel will come back. But yeah, it will. If we do see some overperformance on revenue, then that will flow through largely to the bottom line. So I'm hoping that's answered the question, Andy. And that at the moment is the last question.
Yeah, that's great, Adam. Matt, thank you for addressing both all of those questions that have come through from investors this afternoon. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, if there are any further questions that come through, we will make them available to the team and they'll be able to review these questions and we'll publish any responses where it's appropriate to do so on the Investor Meet Company platform. Matt, Adam, perhaps before redirecting investors to provide you with their feedback, which I know is particularly important to the company, could I please ask you for a few closing comments to wrap up with? Thank you.
Yeah, I'd be glad to wrap up. So first of all, thanks everybody for joining us today. We put this venue together over the last 3 or 4 halves to make sure we can communicate to the individual investor, and certainly, like that we have this channel to do that. We're really excited about kind of how we've executed over the last 3 or 4 years, and even more excited about going forward. I think there's really strong drivers in the marketplace for data erasure, and our position as the leading data erasure company in the world, both from a technology and people and reach perspective, I think allows us to see that we're seeing good top line growth, and that top line growth is accelerating. And as Adam mentioned, we do have good operational gearing, very high gross margins at 97%. And as we can drive top line growth, we'll see that drop that bottom line very, very quickly. So we're excited about the opportunities in front of us, and really excited about how we can drive our business forward over the next 2-3 years. So again, thanks very much for the time today. Look forward to your feedback, and hope to talk to you again in 6 months with some exciting news as we close off FY22 for us.
Matt, that's great. Adam, Matt, thank you very much for your time this afternoon and updating investors this afternoon. Could I please ask investors not to close this session, as you'll now be automatically redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order that the management team can better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete, but I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of BLANCCO Technology Group PLC, we would like to thank you for attending today's session, and good afternoon to you all.